What's next? This is a question we're all having to ask and answer more frequently. I'm Jenny Blake, your host of the Pivot Podcast and author of Pivot, The Only Move That Matters Is Your Next One. For show notes from this episode, visit pivotmethod.com/podcast. If change is the only constant, then let's get better at it. Here we go. Hello, friends. We are back with another episode of the Penney and Jenny Show. I am here with Penney Peirce, who is one of my favorite authors, mentors, friendtors. You've heard her on the podcast many times. If you haven't already, listen to our recent conversation on transparency, her latest book. Go back and listen to that one first, because today we're diving into a deeper dive into some of the topics that Penney covers in her new book. That book is called Transparency, Seeing Through to Our Expanded Human Capacity. And on previous conversations for the Pivot podcast, we've talked about things like intuition, frequency, perception. And I'm just so excited to dive even more into this latest topic of transparency. So Penney, thanks for coming back onto the show.
Oh, it's one of my favorite things to do is talk with you.
Likewise. Whenever Penney and I finish one episode, we think, oh, but there's so much more. We barely scratched the surface. So I want to start, I love with this quote. You talk about the new transparent reality, and you say we need to develop radical trust, which means absolutely trusting yourself as a soul, guide the unfolding of your life, and fuel the function of your inner perceiver. I love that, of your soul as the guide to the unfolding of your life, and that to do so requires radical trust. Say more about that.
Yeah, well, I started thinking what radical meant. At first everybody thinks it means this really great kooky change, extreme, all that, but it really means to get to the root of something. And so that made me think about, well, what would that be when it's applied to trust? And I think in order to become transparent, and my definition of that really is that you identify yourself as the soul in the body, in the personality. You're merged with your earthly self. And the soul then expresses through, this personality with no distortion. And so the radical trust part has to do with trusting that you actually are the soul, that you are here, that everything that happens to you has been kind of planned in a certain way for you to evolve. And whether it seems good or it seems negative, it's still data. It's still experience that you need to evolve. And, so there's the total trust of your own soul, your own self, your own methodology of getting through to your mind, all the things that happen in your world, the way other people behave in your world, every single thing. Trust that it's just right, and when you do that, my goodness, things start making a lot of sense.
I feel that way now, that I really trust everything is in my soul path as a purpose to evolve. And that even if that's not true, I live so much better and freer when I believe that. But what would you say to someone who hasn't yet arrived on that feeling that, oh, everything put in my path is part of my soul's journey and soul's evolution? They think, well, what if it's not? What if it doesn't help my highest growth? What would you say to someone in that place?
I'd say that it has a lot to do with the way you're looking at things. That, if something challenging happens to you, or, maybe you were abused as a child or something, well, why did that happen to an innocent child? It's like we need to understand that the soul is such a huge situation that it has knowledge from many, many lifetimes, and often things that were stuck in previous lifetimes, just as they can be stuck from childhood into adulthood. Are going to play out. And they don't always make sense to the left brain until you expand your worldview and understand how big the process is that's operating. So what is it? It's just education, I guess, to understand the larger context of who we are and how the process of becoming conscious actually happens. I don't know if that makes sense.
Do you believe that we choose our parents? as souls?
Yes, but I'm not sure that we say, "Oh, yeah, give me that one and that one." It's more like I think when we die in one lifetime, we have certain things that a mixture of love and fear. Let's say that we're open and loving in certain areas, and we have fluidity. Other places we have contraction and fear, and things that we wish we hadn't done. And so those go with us. They're almost like imprinted in the energy body of our consciousness that leaves the physical body when we die. I don't like the word die, but shift frequencies, into the other world. And then when we come back again, that's the body we use to incarnate once again. So that, I think, just sort of by natural law matches up with other souls who have similar overlapping patterns. And I mean, you could have had probably a number of combinations of different parents that would have worked for you. But you sort of, I think you just get drawn in to the ones that match your vibration and sort of the evolution that you want. Because I do think we see a lot about our evolution before we're born. We kind of have a sense of what we're going to do with the lifetime.
And I love reframing to say, how do I have the perfect setup for my personal growth and evolution, whether it's with who your parents are or events that are occurring in this moment, people that are frustrating or anything, as you say, that's creating opacity or fear.
Yeah.
On this note, in chapter 7, you talk specifically about relationships and groups as it relates to transparency, and you introduce the idea of soul friends. So what does that mean? What's a soul friend?
I think that this has to do with beings who have evolved to similar levels of clarity, who occupy a certain frequency, and it's kind of like a pool of knowledge that everybody's in that pool of knowledge understands that, and they're of that, of that frequency, I guess is the best word. And then when you meet those beings in the physical world, it suddenly is like, oh, wow, I know just what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, I've been there too. I know, I've traveled to those countries. I know this. I went to that school, and you have all these overlaps and commonalities and sort of a fit together of different puzzle pieces. Like, oh, my thing fits with your thing, and that goes to here, and especially true when you start seeing this happening with groups coming together in the same vibration, where it's really like a big puzzle with pieces that fit together and make a bigger kind of, picture or project.
For you personally, how do you find your soul friends? You described a little bit how you know it when you see it, but yeah, what's your process for finding them, or how do you know? How does it tend to show up in your life?
For me, it's just been an increasing process of letting myself be seen. This kind of exposure thing that I talk about in transparency of being authentic as much as I can in the moment. Don't be defensive. Don't hide. Just let myself be seen. And people who are on that wavelength then can find me. And they find you, I think, on the inner level first, in the inner worlds first. That everything's interconnected in the inner world. It's the unified field. So any particular frequency that you're occupying will immediately have other people who are occupying that same pool of knowledge or that same vibration. And then those people start showing up in each other's fields. They share a large field, if that makes sense, that we're talking about the energy inside of us all. And that means, our beliefs, our thoughts, our feelings, our sensitivities, the amount of spiritual knowledge that's coming through us. It's very similar. So they just are already interconnected. And if you relax, they just start showing up through synchronicities, through somebody saying, oh, so-and-so, did you want to call her? And then you find there's another one. And now I'm calling that the convening, where more people who are of your own vibration are showing up, like emerging out of your field. And your field is your reality,
I love how you described. I really want to highlight this because often, whether we're looking for a romantic partner, new friends, new coworkers, new partners in business, it's easy to focus first on who's outside of you, who you're looking for. And I love how you say that your first task is to be vulnerable and to be willing to be open and to be seen.
Right. How can anybody find you if you're covered over with all kinds of, masks and pleasing behaviors and things that aren't really who you are? If you're not willing to be yourself and show people, I say the spinach in your teeth and your good stuff, they'll never feel comfortable with you because people get around when you get around somebody who's hiding, we all feel it. It's like we're so telepathic and so kinesthetically aware that we can tell when people are holding something back. And then we don't like that because it makes us feel insecure. So what do? We push on them, we dig down into them, we try to break them open, or if they won't, then we reject them and we leave because it's too uncomfortable to be around them. So the more authentic you are and relaxed about it, the more comfortable everybody else is with you.
Knowing that it works so much better to be open and not be hiding. Why do you think it is that so many of us go through phases of life where we pile on the masks and the people pleasing? And I'm speaking for myself, of course, chief among them, but where I had such an aha while you were talking of how can people find us if we're hiding behind layers? And wow, that's so powerful because I think we hide without realizing it a lot of the time. We don't even see that we're hiding. We think we're being ourselves. And then it wasn't until I got into this relationship with Michael, who you've met. We all had a fun soul friend lunch with you and Meg and Vivian. But that he would say things like, you look so much better without makeup. Well, what? No one had ever said that to me before. I've been hiding my whole life. I used to put on makeup to go to yoga class. And it never occurred to me that someone would think I looked better without it until he said it.
Yeah. Well, if you're hiding and you have all these masks, then the kind of people that emerge out of your field are people who are hiding with a lot of masks. Because the thing is, there's no outside world anymore. There's this huge spherical reality and we're in the center of it and everything's inside the sphere with us. So, and that whole sphere is of one real vibration that you're what's the word I want? Determining in each moment. Your preferred state or your pleasing people state or your hiding state or whatever it is, that's the vibe you're putting out in each moment. And the field will match that. And then the people who show up out of the field will match that. So if you're in a habit of, feeling like you're alone or invisible or you're lacking things or you're not good enough the way you are, so you better try to be the way everybody wants you to be, then you just end up getting people who don't see you and who are, want to be pleased constantly. You get the same thing. See, so it's a lot of work, and it's a lot easier to just like let the heavy winter coats and garments just drop off of you and just be comfortable. And I think, as we do that, it makes other people feel more comfortable being unprotected. And then they'll drop all their protections and all their masks. Because transparency is such an interesting thing. When you become transparent and allow people to see through to who you are, no defensiveness, vulnerability is not even a negative thing. It's really just a humility, right? I mean, a statement of who you are in the moment is just the simple self. But when you allow yourself to be that way, then other people feel safe and then they start to be able to be that way. So transparency begets transparency. Then you can see through to them and understand who they really are and have great compassion for them. And then they have great compassion for you. And then it just builds from there.
Yes, I love the idea of And it's not just the idea, but it happens in practice, like you said, that as you model it for people, it invites them to do the same. But how have you removed those layers of hiding, those heavy winter coats as you described? Because they're not always easy to see that we've got them on.
Yeah, that's the whole clearing of the clutter process that I also address pretty strongly here because, I think just a little bit of background information here first is I think we're all basically transparent as souls. We are made of clear light and everything is known by everyone. We're all merged. There are no secrets in the spiritual realm. No need for anything like that because it's all available and it's all beautiful. So when we come into the body and come into the earth in 3 dimensions, we get these illusions of separation, and then we get the illusion of an outside world, which gives us the illusion of fear, and we start taking that as the reality of being in the physical world, that it's a place of suffering and pain, and so we forget about our true world, our true reality, and we get covered over with those contractions of fear. And then we develop belief systems to keep those in place. And so when you become very fundamentalist and conservative and that kind of thinking adheres to very rigid belief systems that, and I'm not saying any of that's bad, but it really doesn't allow the soul to flow through. So to get rid of that, you have to start noticing the difference between when the thoughts you're thinking are very contracted, and usually, those are associated with contracted emotions like anger or resentment or grievances, things like that. And notice them and then say, oh, that's not the way I like to feel. Mm. You have to have something to contrast with those contracted states, which is what I've called your home frequency. That's the vibration of the soul in the body, of being the soul or the diamond light self in the body and looking out with those eyes and seeing this world and seeing the spiritual energy that's inside matter. In other words, you make a choice to see this world as an integrated world where spirit has always been inside of matter, and that's the truth. And the soul is always inside everybody, but their minds don't always know it.
I love how you say in the book, flaws are temporary mistakes of perception. That see yourself from your soul's point of view. Flaws are temporary mistakes in perception. Mm-hmm. You've mentioned a couple times the idea of this merged group, and you call it in the book a merged oversoul. Maybe you've already touched on that, but can you describe a little more what the merged oversoul is and how we all connect into that? I mean, we all kind of already are, but what does it mean to become more transparent to that merged oversoul?
I think as we become transparent in the physical world and see that we have a soul inside of us that actually we don't even have it because we are it. That's understanding yourself as a soul at an individual level. And so we think the soul looks like an individual thing. But the more you raise your vibration and frequency, the more the soul becomes a collective experience. So you might find it first with a soulmate relationship, where you find another person who feels just like a part of you. And together you have a relationship entity that you both co-create. And that guides the relationship. And if you go out and have a soul family, you have a small group of people who all have commonalities, that same frequency vibe. And then you actually are that collective consciousness at that next higher focal length, Mm-hmm. And as you keep going out and out, you can get to bigger kind of groupings of what you might call the soul group or the soul family or the oversoul. But eventually you get to a point where all the souls are basically one soul consciousness. And that is a really huge thing when you realize that we're all here together partaking in this experience of Earth together. And so how would we work against each other if we're all here doing it together and evolving together? nothing works against anything else when they're so, intimately merged.
Then what about what's happening politically, let's say even in the United States or Brexit? There's an international, it seems like a division, or it seems like even the partisan preferences aside, here in the US, it was like there were two completely different groups voting in the election. Like everyone who was so passionate about seeing Hillary elected and everyone who's so passionate about Donald Trump. And it can seem so divided. It doesn't, well, at least certainly not from the media, of course, but it can be very confusing to people, let's say, if we have a vision of unity and this soul group, and we see such division happening, or war overseas, or, it's like, how do we reconcile that if at the end of the day, we're all part of a soul group?
Right. Well, first of all, that's a high frequency perception to understand the unity of the soul and the soul groups. But in practice, in the physical world, most of us fairly divided and fragmented. We don't feel ourselves as the soul. We're very much identified with the left brain, which is the kind of perception that separates things, analyzes things, compartmentalizes, defines, uses separate words and language to describe things. Whereas the right brain is that unified consciousness where everything exists at once. So we are split, basically, and that we're trying to overcome that split now as we are on a spiritual path and learning to get rid of our clutter, that keeps us feeling separate. Anyway, I think that to go back just a little ways, the Earth has been accelerating. And I say this all the time, but, it just keeps energy gets faster and faster and faster. The Earth plane itself, the physical vibration of matter itself is getting faster. The vibration of our bodies is getting faster, and of our emotions and of our thoughts. And as that frequency rises, the things that were able to be suppressed, the fears that could be stored in a subconscious mind, all of our hatreds, all of our fears of people who are very different from us, are starting to come up to the surface. And that surface is the conscious mind of daily reality. And it's happening individually, and it's happening societally. So in society, the clearing of the subconscious mind is the news, it's current events. And so what we're seeing then is, as fear comes up, it's always marked by polarized thinking. It's not unified, right? It's separatist. Me versus the outside world. And the outside world contains dangerous things like other people who have different skin colors than mine, or, different religions than mine, or whatever. And so we maintain opposition a lot. And in order to clear all of that old fear-based thinking, those things have to come to the surface, which is what is happening now. They are being, like popcorn. They're just popping up. And of course, this president is the perfect one to make it all very visible. And, so to me, this is part of a natural clearing process. It's not a backward stage, but it is bringing up people's fears very strongly, to maintain security, to control reality, to avoid reality. You look at the opioid addictions. A lot of people are leaving their bodies or committing suicide or, feeling like victims, where the others are becoming narcissists, So I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of a long answer.
I loved that. It was a great answer. In fact, speaking of the opioid crisis, I'm going to have a guest. I can't wait on the podcast. He is a medical forensic examiner in a morgue. And he was having so many heroin overdoses come into the morgue that he's pivoting from being a medical examiner to go to divinity school and counsel people.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that wild? It's like, so he's saying it on the front lines. And it's very interesting that you use that example of people leaving their body or numbing out. And certainly it isn't helped by the pharmaceutical industry that's more than happy to just shove drugs at everybody. But
I noticed, this is a funny little aside, but when I watch, CNBC, MSNBC, all their ads are drug ads. It's almost like,
Oh, it's
when
shocking.
you watch the news, you
Oh
need to
my
take
gosh.
drugs because it's so negative on
Not
the news.
just that. When I go stay with my grandma, because I use Hulu and HBO Go, I have Apple TV, so I don't have cable and I haven't had
Uh,
it for 7 years. And when I go stay with my grandma, we're watching commercials and I'm shocked at how many of them are now for prescription drugs. It's
yeah,
wild. It's like, okay, and of course, I love TV. I love shows, especially when they're well produced. But
yeah.
if you're not too busy numbing out with your TV, during a commercial break, we'll give you some drugs to,
That's it.
man, or things
Right.
to buy or things to, and you're right. The world is accelerating. It's part of the reason I wrote Pivot is that it can be overwhelming. This move toward and this dismantling of fear or things that aren't working. We see literally statues coming down, like things are being
Right.
dismantled that have
That's
caused
true.
separation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just makes me so intent on wanting to get people an overview to help them understand what's really happening so they can put this in some sort of context and realize that there is a way out of the karma tunnel. Do you know? There is a way out and there will be a good result. And how can we ease that clearing of the clutter and build up the habit of being the soul and knowing what that actually feels like to live that way. It's not just an idea. It's an actual state.
This is what's so powerful from your book Frequency. You share the stages of the transformation process from the intuition or the information age to the intuition age when we go through personal transformation. And one of the steps right there is you're afraid of everything or you're rejecting everything or you feel like the
Yeah.
world is crumbling apart and the sky is falling. And we're feeling that now at a collective level. And your work has been some of the most prominent in my life that says, hey, you keep going. This is one very natural stage of that process. And just wait till you see what's around the corner or in the transparency percepted spherical, because I can't really
Right.
say corners. That wouldn't be a Penny Peirce concept.
But I think it is like somebody said, when you're in hell, just keep walking.
Yes.
Um, but there's something here about uh, the what we call negativity is really just data. You know, it's all energy. It's all just a kind of frequency of energy, and it all has information inside of it. So if you can develop the habit of being patient and staying in your body and allowing yourself to look into things that feel very contracted and awful, then you can see, well, why am I afraid of this, or why do I hate this, or what do I think this could do to me? And the answer is always that you're just needing to occupy yourself more. Be yourself. Don't be that. Don't put your attention on the negative thing and make that your reality. Because, the principles of the new perception have to do with attention. And what you place your attention on starts to drop into a lower frequency and materializes. When you take your
which is what
attention
happened with
out.
the media, by the way, around Trump. Everyone was like, no,
Yeah.
no, no. But then the media kept covering it with
Yeah.
such veracity that it was, well, there it goes. It became the reality. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. Keep going.
Well, I mean, and that's what he does too, to get by with everything. He just makes up things and says it a whole lot and, believes it 100% himself. And, so it sort of hypnotizes people. But with attention, when you put attention into something, especially repeatedly, it will drop in frequency and actually start to come into the physical realm. It will materialize. When you take attention out through being bored with something, or it's just you're finished with it, and let it go, it goes away. It's not a very hard thing to shift your reality, and when you do get your attention out of all the negative things, the alternative is to place attention in the imaginal realm, to know that, hey, there are billions and billions of variables out here in this unified field. I can pick any of them I want, put them together, focus my attention on these things, and make a reality out of it. But I have to feel it physically before it will come into form. You know, so I think with transparency, you start to, if there's nothing in the way, then the soul's, desire for self-expression just flows through, and you feel like giving that talk. You feel like taking that trip. You feel like writing that book or making that new business or whatever it is, because it feels fun for you.
Yes.
And then the whole collective consciousness actually wants you to do that. So they've kind of given it to you so that you can do it and give it back to everybody. And you start cooperating with that flow and realizing that everything that really has that particular feeling of juiciness, I guess, is right for you. It's not a sin to want something that feels fun.
Right. Well, speaking of fun, your book just came out 2 weeks ago, as at the time that we're recording this. So probably by the time everyone's listening, even a little after that. What has surprised you most? That's part one. And part two, what is it like to launch a book from the perspective of transparency? What's different this time around?
I think we do live in these two worlds at once. And my way of marketing in terms of transparency is to go into the inner world in my meditations and just feel everybody and just say, here's the book, here's the vibration of the book. And I just throw it out into the field and say, anybody who's interested in this frequency of information, you'll be able to find it. But here it is. And I just let that go. And I don't use any willpower with it at all. But in the physical world, the publisher wants you to do all this stuff to sell it. So then, okay, well, I'll do lots of interviews and talk and have fun doing that. And it'll connect as it connects, and there will be synchronicities of people who just happen to listen that day or something. I remember when Frequency was selling, the head of the sales team at Simon & Schuster called and said, "What are you doing to make this, to make this sell so much?
Tell us your secrets."
And I said, "Really, nothing."
That's so you. That's so Penney Peirce.
I said, I think it's just word of mouth, and I share it and I talk about it, but I think it's it just has a life of its own. And I don't know. I guess that's whether that's apathetic on my part or what.
But what I love that you can look back and say, and the same thing happened with Intuitive Way, which is you create from your soul. Then your soul friends and the Oversoul finds who are at the same frequency, they find it. Yeah. And then they can't wait to tell each other about it. I've recommended your book so many times, or someone listening to this conversation, the people who resonate. And that's what I love about podcasts is just it's so fun and serendipitous who's going to listen, like you said, and who knows who's going to reach out to you, or they'll go check out Transparency. And it seems like with Frequency, it must have been word of mouth, right? That someone finished it and just says to their friend, "You have to read this book, OMG."
Yeah. Oh, people told me that they were on Amazon and it fell into their shopping cart.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but and somebody said to me about Transparency the other day. They wrote, I've been getting some emails of people who started reading, and she said it just feels like it's coming from another dimension, and it's not so much like reading. It's just that she's absorbing it immediately. It's just like a different process than reading, and she could tell which parts were kind of coming from my left brain and which parts were just, kind of coming from a higher level. And I can tell that too when I look back over the book. I can't remember having written a lot of this, and if you ask me to say what some of these things are in here, I would have to actually read it because I can't remember it in my head. So I know that I do feel that my books come in at they're often right at the edge of, like Frequency came at the beginning the very beginning of that whole movement toward vibration and consciousness and energy like that. And transparency has been a word that's been following me around, for years. And when the publisher said, "Well, do you have another book in you?" And I said, "Well, I think it's transparency is what I think it's supposed to be." And so now you hear that word on the news every day. Something's not transparent enough, or whatever. So
that's like with Pivot. We've sent each other articles where you're
same thing.
They're using it again. Here it is. Here it is.
Yep. And I hear that word too. I hear that on the news as well. So something is divinely guided, and I don't know. I think marketing is you. I remember years ago when I was just doing readings and I was trying to get clients, I would take out ads in these, digests and directories around town, and I'd never get anything from those. But other people would just call out of the blue, like they hadn't seen the ad. So it was sort of like my guidance said to me inside, like, that was just a ceremonial act, Penny. Just taking out that ad and paying for it was like an act of you saying that you mean it.
Love it. I do think that's important, because there's what goes on in our inner world. And then I think it is important, that ceremonial act of just putting some steps out there, taking small steps, and kind of just showing a little bit. Yes, I want this, even if that's not the thing that's going to lead to
the
it's momentum snowball.
The cause and effect is in the left brain, in the linear reality, but the actual results come out of the non-physical reality. And it's hard to understand that, because we're still so addicted to the left brain. And but I think that sometimes desperation over money makes people think that they have to market and do all these affiliate programs and follow the formulas of how to make everything pay off. And
talk about heavy coats, right? Like,
God,
you and I have emailed like, "Don't make me do it," some kind of.
There's something about just relaxing again into who you are and into confidence about why you're here on earth and what you love to do, and that there's value in what you're doing and that value in what you're offering. And there's always an audience, no matter where you are on the level of beginner, or expert or whatever. There's always somebody, and you'll be supported. Things will come to you. If you need money and you're not making it from the book, well, there'll be another way to make money. That it's what was that story about, the people who were drowning and they're on the house of the roof of their house in the flood, and they're praying to God to rescue them, and somebody comes with a boat, and they say, no, God's going to rescue us. No, here's helicopter. No, God's going to rescue us. But who sent the boat and the helicopter?
Yeah, it's a great story.
It is, and so I don't know, just something. It all boils down to this humility, this exposure, this trusting others, enjoying others, offering yourself to the world, and then staying so open that it's okay if, like, I've written 10 books. Well, maybe, and I think my mind thinks, oh, well, now I have to write an 11th book. Well, but maybe I want to go breed dogs or something, like, I don't
That's
know,
true.
maybe there's something else that suddenly will come up, and I've got to be fluid enough and unattached enough to any definitions that I can allow the flow to move me, and that is a big part of transparency, is letting go of your story as well. Like, we all have these stories we tell about who we are and our bios, and yeah, okay, that's a way to connect with other people. But the real true presence is, well, that's the fun part.
It's so beautifully said. Allow the flow to move me. It is fun.
It did. Yeah, it moved me out of Marin County, California to Florida overnight, which was like, what?
Right.
Okay, here I am.
And as we wrap up, where is it taking you now? Do you have any sense or feeling about that yet?
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be some connection coming with bringing a lot of these concepts into application in business, in government, maybe even maybe partly toward the military, or things that where you wouldn't think that they would want to go. Where it would be very difficult for these things to show up. But I have a feeling there's going to be the next phases are all about integration and application of the understanding. So maybe more like consulting or trainings for different kinds of groups.
I love the specification of where you'd least expect it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much room there. And if you could leave listeners with one piece of advice around finding flow and allowing flow to guide them, what would it be? Maybe one experiment that they can run this week.
There was something about, I had a thing one morning where I was waking up and I thought I should get up now. And this inner voice said, don't think about that right now. So I stopped. And then I thought, well, maybe I should clean out that closet today. Don't think about that right now. And so and I just went blank. And then suddenly my body just got up and got out of bed on its own. And I got that feeling difference between when I was giving an order from my left brain and when I was just in the flow and the body was kind of just going when it wanted to at the right exact moment. So if you can pay attention to that throughout the day, instead of thinking, oh, I've got to do this or that's on my to-do list, let yourself have a little free flow in terms of what your body wants or what you find yourself doing, without that structure around it.
That's so powerful. Just noticing, if we could all take that to just notice the difference between the left brain giving orders and the right brain or body just being moved to do.
Because these are feeling states. And I think we have to learn to recognize different kinds of feeling states and those carry insights. They carry knowledge. When you can get into a certain feeling state, it's like putting the radio dial on a certain channel, and then everything's lined up for that particular kind of information to just show up, just flow through. And if you're just giving yourself orders all day, you're just on the left brain channel.
Yeah, that's so. And isn't that? It's just even the way you phrased it. I can look back and see those days where I was just barking orders at myself all day. Like, ugh, it's no way to live. Penny, this has been so much fun. Again, I love the Penny and Jenny show. I really do.
Well, we'll always come up with things to talk about. That's for
I
sure.
look forward to that. I really look forward to that. And even case in point, Penny and I came to this one today. This is now our 5th recorded Pivot podcast together. And we kind of said, what do you want to talk about? I don't know. Here's a few things. How about you? Here's a few things. And we just said, you know what? Let's just go with the flow. So it's the most fun. Penny, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you again. And everybody, if you don't already have it, go get Penny's latest book. It's called Transparency, Seeing Through to Our Expanded Capacity. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Pivot Podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode or my insider tips and templates by signing up for Pivot List, a curated twice-monthly newsletter where I share the inside scoop on what I'm reading, watching, listening to, and the latest tools I'm geeking out on. Sign up at pivotmethod.com/pivotlist. Get show notes from this episode at pivotmethod.com/podcast and connect with me on Twitter at Jenny_Blake. Remember, build first, then your courage will follow. Hasn't it always?